the most important thing, is for people to start something like this, and it's what will save this country, in my view. So I just want to introduce Jeremy Haile. He's the co-author of the Indivisible Guide and an active volunteer from 2008 to 2012. Jeremy served as a legislative aide to Representative Lloyd Doggett from Austin, Texas, along with Indivisible Executive Director Ezra Levin. Since then, Jeremy has worked in criminal justice reform, advocacy at the Sentencing Project, as a public interest lawyer in San Francisco, a longtime activist. Jeremy's work has appeared in the New York, I'm so jealous, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and NPR's All Things Considered. Big round of applause for the founder of
CA-11 United, and Kristen and Ted for your leadership. My name is Jeremy Haile. I'm a public interest lawyer in San Francisco and a co-author of the Indivisible Guide. I am not really a public speaker. I'm more of a guide writer. The last piece of advice my wife gave me before I came up here was not to be clever or funny, but just to be myself. So we'll see how this goes. So the Congressman asked me to talk a little bit about the history of the Indivisible Guide, about the amazing grassroots activism we're seeing all over the country, and about how to sustain this movement for the long haul. So after Trump's election, a group of former Democratic congressional staffers, it was actually more than two of us, there were several of us, but we were having the same conversation that all of us were having, which was, what can we do to resist Trump? We saw a lot of energy in the streets. We saw people coming together on Facebook and on social media. But we didn't think that this energy was being channeled in a way that would make a real difference in Washington. We also knew that Congress is really opaque. It's hard to know what makes Congress tick. We all know that you can call your member of Congress, you can sign an online petition, but how does that all connect to this sort of larger goal of stopping the Trump agenda? So Ezra Levin, my colleague in Congressman Doggett's office, and his wife, Leah Greenberg, had this idea that, well, let's look at what the Tea Party did. So we saw, as congressional staffers, we saw that a relatively small number of disgruntled conservatives organized and eventually were able to bring President Obama's progressive agenda to a halt. And they did that by focusing on their own members of Congress, on their own home turf, and staying defensive. They knew that conservatives could stay unified if they all agreed to just say no. So Ezra and Leah asked a few of their friends to help put together a Google Doc that would apply some of these lessons for progressives on how we could take action to stop the Trump agenda. So the Indivisible Guide is based on sort of a basic understanding of how our democracy works, which is that Donald Trump's agenda doesn't just depend on Donald Trump. It depends on individual members of Congress choosing to go along with that agenda or choosing to resist it. And that gives us, constituents, a lot of power. Members of Congress wake up in the morning thinking about getting reelected. That means they need good local press. When they have a town hall, they want to be applauded for being responsive. When they show up at a ribbon cutting, they want the headline to be, Member of Congress helps build bridge in district or state. What they don't want is footage of dozens of angry constituents showing up and asking why they're cutting deals with a racist and corrupt administration. The election of Trump means that everything that progressives hold dear is under attack. So, if you believe in reproductive rights, fantastic. But you also need to stand up when Muslim communities are demonized. If your issue is environmental protection, great. But you also need to stand up when affordable health care is threatened. So we all have to stand together. If we allow ourselves to be divided, we're going to lose. But if we stand together united, we have a chance to win. So when the Google Doc first went live, most of us, I think, were just hoping that maybe our friends and families would see it, maybe some people in DC would think it was interesting. But the morning after it went out, my buddy emailed and said, "You broke Google." So many people were trying to download the Indivisible Guide that Google actually crashed. But then the most amazing thing happened, which is that we started seeing that all over the country, people were coming together and they were forming local groups. Within a few months, about 6,000 indivisible groups had formed. At least two indivisible groups in every single congressional district in the country. An average of, my math is right, about 15 indivisible groups in each congressional district. And what's great is that most of these folks were nurses or school teachers or IT technicians or retirees, people who hadn't necessarily been engaged in politics before. And if there's a bright side to this Trump horror show that we're all living in, it's this outpouring of civic activism and organizing that we're seeing. And you've shown up at town halls, you've gone to in-district meetings, you've made calls to your members of Congress, you've staged sit-ins, you've staged die-ins, you've marched, you've led 4th of July parades. Here in Contra Costa, you took back an overpass. And this activism is having an impact. So for 7 years, Republicans promised that repealing the Affordable Care Act would be the first thing they did when they retook power. And that did not happen. They now have the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And 6 months later, Trump hasn't passed a single major piece of legislation. And that's because in Illinois, and Kansas, and Eastern Tennessee, and rural Alabama, and right here in Northern California, you've shown up and you've held your members of Congress accountable. You helped give Trump Care a 15% approval rate. So make no mistake, this is your win. But we can't stop now. As long as Republicans control Congress and the White House, the Affordable Care Act is at risk. And this isn't the last fight. Up next on the Trump agenda are truly cruel budget cuts, the elimination of consumer financial protections, slash taxes for the very rich, and who knows what other terrible policies. But even though we're probably going to lose some of these battles, we can win the war. So yes, let's continue working to resist the Trump agenda. If we can't change the positions of members of Congress, let's work to change out the members of Congress themselves. And beyond that, let's build an enduring, progressive movement that can change the country. The way to do that is through organizing. Organizing is about building the power of local groups and about building up local leadership. If a leader leaves the group, another takes their place. The group sustains itself. Indivisible is doing a ton of policy and political work. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is to build up the power of these local groups, to create a sense of shared identity so that we all feel like we're part of a nationwide movement. So the next time that Trump launches an attack against transgender soldiers, or against immigrants, or against women, or tells a group of police officers that it's okay to rough up young Black and Latino men when they're being arrested, that we don't get discouraged, but that we instead redouble our efforts. Indivisible started with a focus on Congress, but while a lot of groups started there, that's not where you stopped. So groups are now getting involved in municipal activities, at city councils, in advocacy before state legislatures. You're getting involved in elections. You're building up a progressive infrastructure, a foundation that in many cases hadn't existed before. We may not control Congress or the White House now, but we are the majority. If the Tea Party could stop President Obama, then working together, we can stop Donald Trump. We can flip the House in 2018. We can build a movement that sustains and protects every member of the progressive ecosystem. And in the end, Indivisible is not about the people who wrote the Indivisible Guide. It's not about the team of policy and political wonks in DC. It's about you, the individuals and groups in states and districts who are organizing and making your voices heard on your home turf. You are doing something historic. And if we continue working together, and if we continue standing up for each other and standing indivisible, we will win. So thank you.
Now, does that look like a revolutionary?